January 1st, 2025. The air across the globe feels heavy, charged with the static of a world that has finally reached its snapping point. For decades, we spoke of tipping points as distant warnings on a map, but as the sun rose on 2025, those points weren't just approaching, they were breaking. In the high hills above Los Angeles, the sky turned a bruised, apocalyptic orange as winter wildfires, fueled by a drought that refused to yield, devoured neighborhoods that once thought they were safe from the fire season. Thousands of miles away, the quiet, stone-cold corridors of the Vatican echoed with the somber tolling of bells for the passing of an era, signaling a transition that would soon place the papacy in American hands for the first time in 2 millennia. This wasn't just another turn of the calendar. It was the moment the old guards finally crumbled and the walls of the post-war consensus began to fall. From the halls of power in Washington to the neon-lit, protest-soaked streets of Seoul, the signals were undeniable. The stability we took for granted was now a relic of the past. The facade has been stripped away. The exposé begins now. By 2025, the global landscape had transformed into a high-stakes arena of protectionism and ideological fracture. The world was no longer a flat marketplace. It was a series of fortified camps. The return of America First under a second Donald Trump administration had effectively dismantled the traditional trade maps, replacing decades of cooperation with a baseline global trade war. This wasn't just a dispute over steel. It was a systemic decoupling that forced every nation from the European Union to Southeast Asia to frantically redraw their alliances. Economically, the post-pandemic hangover was replaced by a crisis of affordability that felt permanent. While the elite celebrated the surging wealth of fossil fuel billionaires who saw their collective net worth jump by billions in mere weeks, the average citizen was grappling with persistent food inflation and a shrinking middle class. Technologically, the world had entered the autonomy era. ChatGPT-5 was no longer a novelty. It was a trillion-dollar engine reshaping the labor market, with machine reasoning leaps that threatened to automate nearly 90 million roles by the decade's end. Culturally, the mood was one of deep-seated grievance. Trust in institutions hit an all-time low as the gap between the wealthy and the working class widened into a canyon. This was a world of vibrant instability. While digital icons like Mr. Beast opened massive theme parks in Saudi Arabia and Taylor Swift's influence reached a near-religious level of devotion, the foundation of the global order was cracking. We were technologically more advanced than ever, yet socially more polarized, vibrating with the energy of a generation that felt the current systems were no longer built to serve them. The context of 2025 was a planet hyper-connected by the internet, but fundamentally divided by the wallet. The spark that truly ignited the trajectory of 2025 was the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th. While presidential transitions are usually routine ceremonies of democracy, this was a total systemic reboot. Within hours of taking the oath, the administration began a protectionist offensive that effectively ended the era of globalism as we knew it. On day one, executive orders confirmed the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and initiated the process to exit the World Health Organization. This wasn't just a political shift, it was the trigger for a worldwide economic realignment. The withdrawal created an immediate power vacuum. By shuttering vital humanitarian agencies like USAID, which saw its workforce slashed from 14,000 to just 294 in a matter of weeks, the United States signaled a retreat from its role as the world's primary benefactor. Allies were left scrambling to form new security blocs, while adversaries saw a window of opportunity to test old boundaries. In the financial markets, the sudden shift toward isolationism caused a volatility not seen in a generation, as supply chains that had been meticulously built over 40 years began to decouple overnight. This one event dictated the flow of every major conflict, trade deal, and social movement that followed. It forced every other nation to decide: follow the path of nationalism or forge a new, uncertain, collective future. The Inauguration Day shock was the moment the world realized that the old normal was never coming back. It was the inciting incident that turned 2025 into a year of radical self-reliance and global friction. Politics in 2025 was a high-wire act performed over an abyss, and the old guard was falling everywhere. In South Korea, the political world was rocked to its core when President Yoon Suk-yeol was arrested and removed from office following a desperate attempt to maintain power through a brush with martial law. This fall from grace sent shockwaves through Asian democracies, proving that even the most established leaders weren't safe from the public's demand for accountability. Across the Atlantic, the political map of Europe was being rewritten. In Germany, the long-standing coalition government shattered under the weight of economic stagnation and immigration disputes, leading to the election of Friedrich Merz as chancellor. His victory marked the first time in post-World War II German history that a chancellor was elected in a second round of parliamentary voting after a first-round defeat, a clear signal of a fractured and desperate political class. But perhaps the most historic shift occurred in the spiritual heart of the West. In May, 133 cardinal electors gathered in a conclave and selected Robert Francis Prevost as the successor to Pope Francis. Taking the name Leo XIV, he became the first American pope in history. His election signaled a shift in the Catholic Church's geopolitical gravity, moving it closer to the front lines of Western social and political debates at a time when the moral authority of global institutions was being questioned at every turn. Meanwhile, in the United States, the political atmosphere was defined by a purge of the federal government, with the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency dismantling entire sections of the state. It was a year where the political map was no longer a static picture, but a battlefield. Society in 2025 was defined by the Gen Z uprisings. Across Nepal, the Philippines, and Morocco, young protesters utilized social media to organize mass movements against oppressive governance and elite corruption. These activists adopted a surprising symbol, the pirate flag from the manga One Piece. This skull and crossbones wearing a straw hat became a global symbol of resistance, spreading across continents to unify a generation that felt the economic and social systems had failed them. In Nepal, these protests were so powerful they forced the Maoist prime minister from office, proving that the digital street could topple physical regimes. In the West, pop culture became a strange mirror for the year's volatility. The Super Bowl performance by Kendrick Lamar, which featured a resurrection of bootcut denim, became a global fashion phenomenon that masked a deeper cultural tension. But the headline that captivated the world wasn't a concert, it was a crime. In a brazen daylight heist, pieces of the French crown jewels were stolen from the Louvre's Galerie d'Apollon, a spectacular theft that highlighted a global public that was hyper-connected, deeply cynical, and increasingly willing to take matters into their own hands. Social media itself became a battlefield for truth. While AI models like Pop Eve were being used to identify genetic variants that cause disease, they were also being used to create hyper-realistic deepfakes that fueled a crisis of reality. Yet, amid the cynicism, there were moments of cultural unity. The long-awaited reunion of the K-pop titans BTS in July brought a rare moment of global joy, proving that music remained one of the few universal languages left in a fractured world. Society was a paradox, a global youth movement fighting for the future, while the rest of the world watched a spectacular heist on their screens. As mid-year approached, the friction between the new political order and the old world's problems began to compound with terrifying momentum. The trade war wasn't just affecting luxury goods, it was driving up the price of medicine and grain, leading to a series of coordinated boycotts across southeastern Europe. Tensions between India and Pakistan reached a fever pitch in May, after a deadly attack in Pahalgam led to a series of retaliatory missile strikes. For 3 days, two nuclear-armed neighbors stood on the brink of full-scale war before a fragile ceasefire was brokered, leaving the world to realize how thin the thread of peace had become. Simultaneously, the pressure in the Middle East reached a red line. While a brief, US-pressured ceasefire in Gaza offered a glimmer of hope in the winter, it was shattered by renewed bombardments by the fall. The United Nations issued harrowing reports on the humanitarian cost, even as regional tensions flared into a 12-day war in June, during which Israel, with American assistance, launched raids against Iranian nuclear facilities. The stakes were raised further when the United States conducted military strikes against Venezuelan vessels, interpreted by the world as a show of force in a tightening global chess match. The peace of the early 2020s was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a momentum toward confrontation that seemed impossible to slow. Every conflict felt connected. A trade tariff in Washington led to a protest in Nepal, which led to a security crisis in the South China Sea. The world was no longer a collection of isolated events. It was a pressure cooker where every valve was being tightened at once. Despite the pervasive sense of crisis, 2025 was a year of staggering human achievement and technological breakthroughs that took society forward. In the world of medicine, the FDS's approval of the first in-home cervical cancer test marked a massive win for women's healthcare, while the 2025 Breakthrough Prize in Life Sciences was awarded to David Liu for a revolutionary gene editing platform that precisely corrects genetic mutations. Scientists at Harvard even pioneered a way to achieve the coolest possible temperatures to image materials at a subatomic scale, opening the door to a quantum leap in computing. In the heavens, the second space race hit a new milestone. Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost made a successful commercial soft landing on the moon, while NASA-funded telescopes discovered Comet 3I Atlas, an interstellar object that may be the oldest known comet in existence. These missions weren't just about science. They were reminders of the mysteries still left on Earth and beyond, like the first ever high-definition footage of a colossal squid in its natural habitat. Even in the cultural sphere, there were wins created by the very chaos of the year. Thailand became the first country in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, a landmark victory for human rights. In the realm of literature and heritage, ancient DNA studies finally identified the genetic originators of the Indo-European language family, unifying 400 languages into a single historical picture. These highs were often fueled by the urgency of the times. The need for climate solutions led to the development of energy-saving membranes that can separate water vapor from air, and new AI models began speeding up the diagnosis of rare diseases. People believed that if we could just survive the political turbulence, the tools for a utopian future were finally within our reach. It was a year of the brilliant bloom amid the rubble, proving that human curiosity is a force that even a global trade war cannot extinguish. The human cost of 2025 was staggering, written in the wreckage of natural and man-made disasters that moved society in the wrong direction. Hurricane Melissa, a monstrous Category 5 storm, tore through the Caribbean, leaving Jamaica and Haiti in ruins and displacing millions. In the United States, the July Camp Mystic floods in Texas claimed 135 lives, including dozens of young campers, a tragedy that became a heartbreaking symbol of the increasing lethality of extreme weather. The Palisades fire in Los Angeles wasn't just a property loss, it was a public health catastrophe, with air quality issues linked to hundreds of respiratory deaths. Beyond the natural world, the human-led tragedies were equally grim. The war in Sudan became the largest displacement crisis on Earth, with 14 million people fleeing famine and cholera while the world's attention was elsewhere. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake in Myanmar killed over 3,600 people in March, leaving thousands more injured in a region already struggling with political instability. The lows were also found in the halls of power. The dismantling of USAID and the U.S. withdrawal from the WHO brought many health and medical research programs to an abrupt halt, causing supply disruptions for life-saving HIV/AIDS treatments in dozens of countries. The global gag rule was reinstated, denying aid to organizations involved in reproductive health, a move that experts predicted could lead to millions of unintended pregnancies and thousands of deaths. These were the failures of a global system that seemed unable to protect its most vulnerable, leaving a trail of long-term damage that will be felt for decades. 2025 was the year we realized that our infrastructure, both physical and moral, was no longer enough to withstand the storms we had created. History will look back at 2025 as the year the post-war consensus finally breathed its last. It was a turning point because it marked the definitive end of the globalist experiment that began in the 1990s. The shift toward protectionism and nationalism wasn't just a temporary political swing, it was a fundamental re-evaluation of how nations interact. This was the year that AI moved from a tool to a force of nature, permanently decoupling productivity from traditional labor and forcing a global conversation about the value of a human worker in the autonomy era. It mattered because it was a lesson in the fragility of modern systems, how a single election or a single storm could unravel decades of progress. 2025 was the moment the Gen Z generation transitioned from observers to participants, toppling governments with pirate flags and demanding a seat at a table that was rapidly shrinking. It reshaped the direction of history by proving that the old rules of diplomacy, economics, and environmental management were no longer sufficient. What began was an era of radical self-reliance, a combination of high-tech and high-tension that would define the rest of the 21st century. 2025 was a year of fire and frost, of brilliant breakthroughs and devastating breakdowns. It was the year we stopped waiting for the future and realized we were already drowning in it. As the dust settles, one thing is clear: the world would never be the same again. But even as we process the exposure of 2025, the gears of history are already turning toward 2026. Will the stakes get higher in the years to come? If this year surprised you, challenged what you thought you knew, or reminded you of something you lived through, leave a comment with what it meant to you. If this series helps you understand the present through the past, consider liking the video. And if you want every year exposed, subscribe to the channel. History isn't just something we watch, it's something we interpret, and something many of us lived through. Another year exposed is coming soon. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.